until we get our quorum. And we will begin with Senator Wolk's bill, SB 14. Welcome, Senator Wolk.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. SB 14 is a reintroduction of SB 1020, which I authored last year, which passed out of the Senate without opposition. This bill directs the Department of Finance to draft the state budget using performance-based budgeting practices. As we all know, our current budget materials compare the governor's spending proposals against the last two prior years. That process does not identify goals, build agreement on priorities, or provide information on performance. Adopting a performance approach to budgeting will give the legislature, the administration, and the public better information on what's working and where we need to make changes. The bill will require the governor to put on the web basic information on the mission of each agency, its past performance, and future performance targets. This bill also establishes a process for legislative review of the operations of public programs at least once every 10 years. Upon the recommendation of the Budget Committee staff, we're proposing amendments that would address technical issues. First, the amendments will remove the language specifying that the performance reviews be handled by the Joint Sunset Review Committee and instead defer to the houses on how to conduct those reviews. The amendments clarify that the budget bill sent to the governor would not need to include performance information, but the materials provided by the governor to the legislature would include that information. And we're adding language to indicate that the bill would take effect when it is funded. I want to thank your staff for all of the help that they put with us on this bill. We appreciate the refinements. I have with me today Sonny Wright McPeak with California Forward, Libby Scholes from Church Impact, and other folks who will be, I believe, Rihanna Jones. Do I have Rihanna? No. Okay. Representing SEIU and others. Welcome. And I ask for your aye vote. Thank you. And I want to thank the Vice Chair for being a joint author with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Proponents, welcome, Ms. McPeak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. As Senator Wolk said, I'm representing California Forward today, and I've had the privilege and opportunity to speak before many of you in various other committees on this matter, but we are here to support SB 14 and to encourage the approval of performance-based management and budgeting as the law for the state of California. I want to commend Senator Wolk and Senator Huff and Senator Salme as the authors and co-authors here. There's also good authors, co-authors in the Assembly. So bipartisan leadership by House leadership. We at California Forward have advanced for some time now the need to have, as a centerpiece of governance reform, common sense focus on what are we trying to do when we budget. You know, what are the outcomes and how do we measure them, and build into the budgeting process a regular statement of what are those expected and anticipated outcomes, how will we measure them, and then report back. Have the administration report back to the legislature, the government reporting back to the people. Here, what I think is also important as you are considering the legislation is, so what are the fiscal impacts? And I'm here to testify to my experience over 40 years that this kind of change in the practice of government need not, should not, and cannot cost a lot of additional money. Indeed, it takes a commitment of resources. I'm experienced in trying to work at a county level, mostly in the human services field, because that's what counties do, with no money immediately after the passage of Prop 13, changing the way we deliver services and getting better results for people. I had the opportunity to work for all of you, for the state of California, with Business, Transportation, and Housing, a very large agency, very complex. We totally redid that agency without any new people, any new money. In fact, I wasn't fully staffed, if you will. There were vacant positions, but reorganized every one of those departments. resulting in about $181 million of savings, things that you're well aware of, getting wait lines at DMV down from an hour to 21 minutes, etc. It does take an imperative. That's why this legislation is so important, that you establish what is the law in California that will be the underpinning of changing the way we do business. And that the very people we have doing budgets today are the ones who will change their practice. So, yes, we will need those resources, but they're not additional costs. And I don't care who tells you it's going to be more money. Don't believe them and don't allow it to happen. Now, here's what it will take. In the parlance of government organization or business, it's often called a change management organization. To be sure, you have to have appointed executive leadership to make it happen. You've got lots of staff. You can bring them together. You need to create such an organization, and it needs to be resourced. That can be done in a variety of ways. A task force is called for within this legislation. That's entirely workable. You can reassign staff. At BTNH, I had the benefit of bringing in 50 outside people who volunteered their time. You could probably ask for some foundations to provide a little bit of money to sustain this effort. So I am not going to tell you, you just pass a law and then forget about it. It will take huge amount of focus and effort, but it need not, should not, cannot cost a whole lot of more money. I am happy to answer questions about how does this actually get done, how it works, but we urge you to support it. This will be your passage today, the adoption by the legislature, signing this into law, will be the best signal to the private sector that they can start thinking about investing dollars in California again, because we're ready to do business differently and tell the taxpayers, here's the return on investment you're getting, and we're making the lives of people we serve in government better, because we're actually going to focus on making their lives better.
You make a passionate argument for this, and I know this has been an issue area that you have really made into an expertise, and you certainly have proved the fact of it in your own experience here in state government. So we really appreciate your being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Silva, you speaking?
I'm here to answer questions.
You're here as the resident expert. Okay.
Chris Rose on behalf of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. We believe this bill goes a long way in helping establish goals, measure progress, and restore the public trust in the budget process. So we ask for your aye vote.
Great. We're going to hear from other proponents, and then, though I don't believe there is any listed opposition, we certainly want to hear from the Department of Finance and also from the Legislative Analyst's Office. So others in support.
Olga Lilia Ramirez with the California State Student Association in support of the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez.
Good morning. Elizabeth Scholes with California Church Impact in strong support of this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Scholes.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Lynch, representing the California Association Nonprofits in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch.
Mr. Chair, Chris McKaylee on behalf of the California Grocers Association, and we too support the measure. Despite that there will be some startup costs, we think that there are tremendous long-term benefits with this bill.
Thank you, Mr. McKaylee. Others in support? Anyone else in support? Anyone in opposition? We'll move on to the Department of Finance.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Miriam Ingenito with the Department of Finance. The annual cost of this bill could reach the tens of millions of dollars on a statewide basis. The estimate is based on the costs from the prior performance-based budgeting pilot program. Given the recent reductions in state operations that the other departments have faced, additional costs are not absorbable. Although planning for the future and measuring performance and reviewing programs are all worthy ideas, and knowing that the governor is committed to an open, honest, and ongoing or long-term balanced budget, we regret that the Department of Finance is unable to support this measure. It is currently drafted at this time. There are significant costs associated with the bill, and the timelines outlined in it are unachievable for various provisions. The performance-based the performance-based budgeting pilot program incurred significant costs. The LAO in 1995-96 analysis of the budget bill identified various departments having expended anywhere between $264,000, which was at the low end at the Department of Parks and Recreation, to $2.6 million for the Department of Consumer Affairs in staff costs alone to conduct the pilot. There are significant costs associated with the bill, associated with the definition of performance-based budgeting for the state and establishing corresponding policies and procedures, to develop performance-based budgets themselves, to identify the legal basis and budgetary requirements for each department and each activity. We believe there are costs to establish performance standards and evaluate methods, to include them in the budget, and to modify or design information systems that are capable of capturing such data.
We're going to take just a moment to establish our quorum, and then I'll ask you to continue.
Leno?
Here.
Huff? Here. Alquist?
Here.
Anderson? Desaulniers? Emerson? Here. Evans? Here. Fuller? Present. Hancock? LaMalfa? Here. Liu? Lowenthal? Here. Rubio? Here. Simidian? Here. Wolk?
Here.
Right.
Very good. Thank you, colleagues. We do have our quorum. Please proceed.
Significant efforts would be required for the development of performance-based budgeting policies and procedures, training, and the development of the performance standards. Multi-year projections indicate a significant shortfall of resources in out years. There are not sufficient resources to fund the implementation of a new budgeting practice, and the costs would not be absorbable by the departments at this time. And just on a programmatic basis, we just had a couple of additional comments, if it pleases the chair and the committee. The performance-based budgeting pilot done in the 90s was broadly considered unsuccessful. The pilot was dropped because it did not meet the initial expectations with regard to the development of true performance outcomes and measures and did not produce the anticipated savings. For the most part, it ended up being input and output measurements, which may work in some cases, but not in all cases. The changing performance standards and metrics are not feasible in state budgeting. So one of the provisions of the bill states that the performance standards in the budget bill introduced by the governor could be amended by the legislature. So once you've gone through the cost and expenditure of developing those, then the legislature could change them, thereby having to spend additional resources to amend your baseline and having the historical data and comparison points potentially not relevant. The 2012-13 phase-in is unrealistic. The performance standards and evaluation methods must be established. The early 1990s performance-based budgeting pilot showed that these steps may take 2 to 5 years to develop in some departments. The bill does not provide sufficient time between the enactment date and the implementation date. Easy for me to say. And then finally, Fiscal. Efforts are underway right now to implement the financial information system for California project known as Fiscal. The requirements in Fiscal would be able to perform other types of budgeting, such as performance-based budgeting, zero-based budgeting, and Fiscal could help transition from the existing baseline budgeting that we currently have to a performance-based budgeting. However, that system is not going to be fully operational until 2017-18, and given that, the interim would result in significant costs to amend and to develop a system currently for the 5-year budgets that we would need, the 5 years before Fiscal comes online, and then additional costs to then merge that information again into Fiscal. So those are some of the additional concerns that we have with the measure as it's currently drafted.
You have our analysis in front of you?
I do.
If you could turn to page 3. There are some bulleted points at the top. I know you can't speak universally for the entire state government, but in general, could we just go through some of these bullet points and give us a sense of how the administration in its budgeting process does or does not address these points? For example, would you say that state agencies do address emission and have goals?
In the budget document released by the governor, it does. Each department has its mission statement printed.
Okay. Activities and programs focused on achieving those goals?
Through the performance base, or through the baseline budgets, we break it down by program areas, how much are spent in each area.
Performance metrics that reflect desired outcomes for existing and proposed activities and a targeted performance level for the following year?
I can't speak to that.
Okay. Prior year performance data and an explanation of deviation from previous year targets?
There's, in the budget, it reflects the current year expenditures, the budget year, and then budget year plus one. So to the extent that there is a difference, we usually put bullets in the budget to, the BCP is essentially changing, or the difference between one and the other. But as far as explaining the previous year targets, no.
Proposed changes in statute, including the creation of incentives or elimination of disincentives that could improve outcomes or hold down costs?
Well, to the extent we submit trailer bills that implement our budget proposals that may do that, we do have extensive, as you know, trailer bill language that we propose with our budget.
And then the last bullet is a description of the impacts and the consequences to the current recipients or beneficiaries of a program proposed for modification or elimination.
And that's what our budget change proposals kind of outline and walk through. Is the proposed changes to our budget.
Right. Without going much further, and I'm sure we could talk about each of these bullets in much greater depth, but the one that you decided not to answer was the performance metrics. So that maybe gets to the core of one of the significant changes and reasons for this bill, performance metrics that reflect desired outcomes for existing and proposed activities. I would have asked the LAO, is anyone from LAO here? I don't think so. No fault on you, that's our doing. In the middle of that same page 3, the analysis states that the bill requires the LAO to review the adequacy of performance metrics, getting back to that same bullet point, and progress toward targeted outcomes in preparing its review. I would have asked LAO to compare their current process to that. Don't know if anyone wants to speak to it. Not with authority of the LAO, just any experience with it. Okay, we'll leave that unanswered then.
Sure. Sonny can speak to
Ms.
that.
McPeak?
Mr. Chairman, I can give you, I think, some pretty specific examples of what changed internally at BT&H versus the process that the Department of Finance just outlined, which is all that the LAO has to deal with. So when you look at a budget, what was it last year, what is proposed this year, what is the change? So you're looking at money, you don't look at results. And that's almost the story totally. It's a matter of changing the culture and a focus on outcomes. I, for example, in the Department of Real Estate, asked, how many people are we licensing? How long does it take? How do we cut down the costs? Because that, not a general fund supported department, but paid for by fees from the people getting licensed. When I came in, it was taking 6 months. We got it down to 2 months. Now, we did that by saying, okay, 6 months isn't acceptable, and we had a backlog of thousands of folks who couldn't work in California because they weren't licensed. We looked at what does it take to protect the consumer, do that reverse engineering, and then when the Department of Real Estate would come to me, which is the start of these budget change proposals that happen every year, and say, we need X number of people, I would say, why? Because what does it take to produce the shortest amount of time to produce a license? We worked through the entire backlog and got it down to less than 60 days. Then I could see, I was pretty confident, because we benchmarked that against every other large state, and we knew if a person was needed or not. When I got hauled in before the Department of Finance and asked to justify 2 more people for the Department of Real Estate, I could say yes, because it actually does change how many people we can license, and it has an impact on the state of California. I can give you exact specifics on every other department that we had at BT&H, and that's the difference that then you would have in front of you to know, well, as any given department in the state of California, in any given agency, is it the best? Is it among the best? Is it the middle? Is it the worst across the country in similar organizations? And how much expenditure of tax dollars is needed to produce a given result, but a result that makes a difference to your constituents or to the people we're serving. That's the difference. And I will tell you, the performance-based budgeting experiment was a total failure in the past. Not because people didn't care and try, but first and foremost, it was an add-on. It wasn't as if we're changing how this department operates, the four that were selected. It was sort of an additional exercise. There was little continuing focus from the top leadership of get this done and get it done now. So there wasn't that kind of an imperative. And then it was an attempt to make it almost a mechanical exercise on budgeting. That's not what it is. What we are talking about are outcomes, and you start with whatever you can figure out in the next 90 days, the next 6 months, that kind of thing. You start with the time frame you set on what outcomes can any program, department, and agency figure out, and that becomes what you work from. And that exercise of focus on the most important priorities that you continuously approve over time changes, like that, the culture of an organization. And that's what your current budget people that you pay for should be doing. That's why, and that wasn't happening in the past in that experiment, and that's why it failed. You must have the law, the leadership, the support, and the constant accountability to get the job done.
Thank you, Ms. Speak. Just two final questions for you. How is it that we lost you, and what it would take for us to have you back?
I'm sitting here supporting your leadership, and I'm just a citizen of California wanting to see this done, and I know there are many others who would join me in wanting to help you implement should you pass the law.
Very good. Committee members, other questions? Sure, Senator Huff.
Yes, for Department of Finance, you commented that implementing this could cost tens of millions of dollars. Can you quantify what not implementing this costs the state of California?
There's no way for me to do that.
There is no way because we don't do it, right? I mean, that's the whole problem. We have, and let me just opine for a little bit, and then I'll ask a couple other questions like that. Government is sole source. We provide the service. If people don't like it, tough. We may, as members here, have different priorities about what we would like to fund in government, but I think we're all united that we would like the money that we do spend to be used wisely. But we're not put together that way. That's what this bill is striking at. It's trying to create some kind of review about whether we're actually using our money wisely, because if we have more, we can use it more for the programs we want to fund rather than just the structure that's implementing those programs that we want to fund. And so I use this every time we get into this, but if you aim at nothing, you're sure to hit your target. And so when we don't have metrics to analyze whether we're actually doing what we believe we're supposed to be doing, we can't assess it to see if we could do it more efficiently and save the money, and that's why I asked that question I knew you couldn't answer, because we're not solving for that problem. And yet, through this bill, we're asking the Department of Finance, we're asking the governor through his different departments to do that. You made the comment also that the costs were not absorbable at this time, and yet we have a former secretary that has commented that she took her budget, and with her drive, and frankly she does have a little more drive than most that are in charge of things like that, she made it work. And I would say also, and I think there's a little bit of testimony on that from Ms. McPeak also, in the 90s unsuccessful, it did not have the institutional buy-off. This was something, as you said, an add-on. It wasn't something that was outcome-oriented. It was more like, oh my gosh, we've got one more thing to do. How do we do this? You go through a mechanical process. You're not going to get somewhere because that was never the real objective. This is a cultural change of how we go about with the billions of dollars entrusted to us, making sure we know what our mission is, and then whether we've hit the mark or not. And if we can do it more efficiently, or if we can save some money that can be either given back to the taxpayers, as we would like, or to fund another program that others would like, or maybe we would like, then that's there. But right now we've created sole source. We've created no competition. We don't even allow, contracting out state services that brings that market for us. In the business world, you either stay in tune to what the market wants or you go out of existence. Well, we can't go out of existence. We're the government. There's some that would like us to go out of existence, but that's another story. But this is something that I've gotten firmly behind because I believe it at least creates one method where a sole source organization has some method of saying where they want to go and how they can get there and how they can do it more efficiently. But just tracking whether we spent more than what we thought we would spend or we spent less than we thought we would spend, rather than what is it we're trying to do and can we do that more efficiently, I think we're missing the mark right now. And that's why I think this is so essential. I didn't mean to take so much time on it, but I think it's very important. You can't score what you don't know is out there if we're not even trying to solve for that problem, and we are not. This will hopefully get us in that direction.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I just do want to be clear that the administration is not opposed to performance-based budgeting. It does have concerns with the measure as it is presented to us today. And one of the main cost drivers and one of the main concerns that we have is the timeline. We are developing our Fiscal system, which is going to be equipped to incorporate, should the legislature want to go to performance-based budgeting or to zero-based budgeting or to some other alternatives. It's just a matter of timing and to develop the system to be able to put the data into, to be able to produce and to report to the legislature as well as to manage to it. And so I think that the administration is willing to work with the legislature on this as well as other budget reform proposals. And as far as what is absorbable and what measures, it greatly, the cost to implement and develop performance-based measurements varies greatly, and I think that we recognize that from the pilot as well as what's available to us in the different departments. How do you, what are the measurements you're looking for at the Department of Corrections versus a health program versus issuing, your wait times in line or your wait times to get a permit? Those are different types of things that need to be measured, and agreeing on the measurements as to whether or not corrections is being successful in implementing its programs causes more debate, I think.
Quick follow-up question.
Quick follow-up from Senator Huff.
Yeah. When did you say the Fiscal program would be in place?
2017-18.
So we're talking like 6-7 years down the road or so, 5-6 years. Ms. McPeak, how long did it take you to get your department whipped into shape?
First change was 90 days, then the action plans were 6 months, and the next budget year we were ready to go with outcomes.
Yeah, I think it absolutely can be done differently, and I respect that we have different missions in different departments, but you have professionals that have been dealing with this stuff for a long time that should be able to quantify what it is they're trying to do, and if they can't, they ought to be out of there. And it shouldn't have to take 5 or 6 years. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Huff. We have significant bipartisan support today. I know we have some other colleagues who wish to ask some questions, but I do have to just clarify. The state does not prohibit contracting out. We do contract out. We contract out in corrections. We contract out in transportation. We contract out in IT systems. We contract out. Senator Rubio.
I think some want to contract out the legislature, but
only certain members.
I want to strongly support the author, thank her for the work and bringing it forward, and Ms. Peak for coming here today and showing your continued enthusiasm to make state government work better. I would look at this from a bit different perspective than my fine colleague, Senator Huff, in that while we all want to spend our money efficiently, I think the bottom line for us is that we want the state to perform well. And different than the private sector, where you have the discipline of a bottom line, you either make money to put food on the table or you don't. Government has a very difficult time determining where our bottom line is. I believe fundamentally that our bottom line is our performance. We do not have any mechanism today to determine how well we are performing on behalf of the citizens of California. For instance, who is tracking, measuring, and monitoring the success of developing Fiscal for the next 6 to 7 years? Nobody. And so how we institute this, I think, is as important as to when we institute this particular performance-based system. And not only would I like to be a principal co-author on this bill, but Mr. Chairman, at some point, if there is true bipartisan support for this measure and others that are trying to find a way for the state to perform better so that we can have cost savings, we put $1 up front. in a former life working at a government entity where we established performance indicators, we saw significant savings, but even more important than that, we started rebuilding the credibility of our constituents, because when they came in, we could tell them it will take this long to get this permit. You have a pothole, it'll take us this long to fill it. As simple as that to as large as how long will you be waiting in a waiting room should you be a Medi-Cal recipient. I mean, these are the types of things that we need to be doing. I'd like to see this be an urgency so that we start this sooner rather than later. To me, I think we should be doing this as soon as possible. So I'd like to move on the measure.
Senator Alquist.
Thank you.
Other members?
As a principal co-author of this bill, I had believed it's very important, and it's something we should have done a long time ago. I remember back in the early 80s when I was a financial analyst at Stanford University, I did this. I worked on these kinds of issues. I don't think it's going to take quite as long as finance believes. And of course, one variable is, the state's fiscal health. But I think we could be moving right ahead. In looking at 2 to 5 years, I think that 5 years is just unacceptable. And I say that respectfully. But it's something we should have been doing many years ago, and look forward to this becoming law. And I thank Sarah Wolkoff and DeSaulnier for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Alquist. Any other comments before we take our vote? Questions, comments? We have a motion from Senator Rubio as amended. Thank the author for working with the committee on those amendments. So, no other comments? We'll call the roll.
To pass as amended to the floor, Senator Leno?
Aye.
Huff?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Huff, aye. Alquist?
Aye.
Alquist, aye. Anderson?
Aye.
Anderson, aye. DeSaulnier?
Aye.
DeSaulnier, aye. Emerson? Emerson, aye. Evans? Evans, aye. Fuller? Fuller, aye. Hancock? LaMalfa? LaMalfa, aye. Liu? Liu, aye. Lowenthal? Lowenthal, aye. Rubio? Rubio, aye. Semidian? Semidian, aye. Wolk?
Aye.
Wolk, aye. Wright? 15-0.
We have sufficient votes. We will keep the roll open as there are other committee members and other committees at this time. We have 2 other bills before us. Thank you, Senator Wolk.
Thank you very much again to the staff and the members of the committee for their support, and the co-authors and joint authors and all. Thank you very much.
Very good. The 2 other bills before us, committee members, are SB 15 by Senator Saulnier, which we'll take up now, and then SB 822 by Senator Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. SB 15 is a companion to the bill you just heard, but it will change the way we do budgeting. And just briefly,
Members, if we could focus, please, for Senator Saulnier. Go ahead.
What was that word again? It will require the governor to prepare 2-year budgets. So it's not a 2-year budget, it's an annual budget, but with a second year added on. Provides for better oversight, better planning. Also provides for a 5-year expenditure and revenue forecast. Also, the governor and the Department of Finance would be required to do some analysis of the impact of our budget on the state's economy. And then it would, as I said, work with Senator Wolk's bill to actually get the Department of Finance as part of the budget to do those performance metrics. We're happy to take the amendments that staff has suggested on implementation, phasing in the implementation, and we understand there's some more potential amendments. I'm happy to continue to work with the Department of Finance and the administration. We want this to work for everyone as soon as possible. Last year, this bill went out of this House 36-1. With that, I'm happy to turn it over for brief comments from our witnesses.
Thank you, Senator. The only other amendment to be consistent with Senator Wolk's is that we would, with the same wording, have the bill take effect upon an appropriation.
Of course, that's fine.
Your agreement with that,
yes.
Those would be the only amendments.
And
Ms.
Mr. Chairman,
McPeak.
thank you. I'm Sunny McPeak representing California Forward and supporting Senate Bill 15 as companion to Senate Bill 14. This gives us better information, looks ahead, provides that additional discipline from the administration. We're very pleased to be here today with a set of other organizations supporting all of these bills. I think it's very encouraging that the student leadership of the state has come forward, because they're going to have to make it happen, that we've got labor leadership from SEIU and the churches, because God knows we mortals need all the divine intervention we can get. So with that prayer, we urge a aye vote on Senate Bill 15.
Ms. Scholes will give you an amen to that. Others in support?
Thank you, Chair and members. David O'Toole, representing the State Controller, co-sponsor of the measure. The consequences of building a one-year state budget without utilizing a multi-year forecast are now self-evident. Over the last 5 years, California's structural budget deficit, as we know, has been persistent and worsening. Just to maintain a positive cash balance, speaking from a cash perspective, from the Controller's office, the state borrows almost $20 billion annually from special funds, and the last time the state had a positive cash balance was July 12, 2007. Members, as you know, the development of a sound budget depends upon realistic assumptions and forecasts of revenues and expenditures. SB 15 would increase the scope and frequency of those forecasts, improve transparency and credibility of the assumptions that underlie them, and better inform you, the policymakers, for tough fiscal decisions. We think that through earlier problem identification, the legislature will be positioned to make both current and future expenditure decisions and avoid draconian cuts when revenues unexpectedly deteriorate. Thank you for your attention to this measure, and respectfully request your support.
Thank you for your co-sponsorship. I just have one question for you. For purposes of full disclosure, I'm in full support of the bill. But just to play devil's advocate, I know I've heard the legislative analysts say any number of times the only thing certain about projections is that they will be inaccurate. So the question is, with the greater time between the projection of any revenue or expenditure and that actual fact and date, is there only greater likelihood for inaccuracy or even greater inaccuracy?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, it doesn't change the current process we're in, so that if we're in the crisis we're in terms of implementation, so the governor could do what he's doing now, call it a fiscal emergency, have us come back and respond to that. I would argue, and certainly let the witnesses join in their opinion, is that the absence of these projections puts us in a weaker position. Just trying to get the numbers right at least allows us for a longer horizon, more thoughtful discussion, and more transparency. I don't know if Ms. McPeak or the Controller's office.
That's the answer. Very good. Others in support? You can use any microphone. Yes.
Elizabeth Scholes, California Church Impact, in strong support of this bill, and we ask your aye vote.
Thank you, Ms. Scholes.
Chris Rosa, representing the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, in support.
Thank you.
Olga Delia Ramirez with the California State Student Association, also in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. Anyone else? Want to hear from Finance?
Mr. Chairman.
Depends.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill could result in significant costs on the part of the Department of Finance to incorporate new procedures to accommodate a two-year spending plan, including changes to demographic, economic, revenue, budgeting, and departmental systems. Implementing performance measures could cost, again, that's the same estimate that we used for Ms. Wolk's bill, could cost tens of millions of dollars on a statewide basis, and obviously they're not additive. So if we're developing performance measures, it's a one-time, tens of millions of dollars. The estimate is based on the cost of the pilot program done on performance-based budgeting. And given the recent reductions to the state operations of the departments, these costs would not be absorbable. As noted earlier, the governor is committed to open and honest budgeting and is willing to work with the legislature on these proposals as well as some of the others that have been introduced by the Assembly. But at this time, we're not able to support this measure in its current form. The budgeting system, the systems are currently not equipped to handle preparing two one-year budget plans concurrently. There's insufficient implementation time to achieve the various provisions. Requiring the preparation of additional forecasts would create another blackout period during which the state could not issue bonds. and there are significant costs associated, as noted, with this measure. And then as far as the, speaking to the estimate question that you had asked earlier, the revenue, cost of living adjustments, and population projections on which the annual budgets are based are difficult to project under the current annual budget, and such estimates we believe would be more difficult to accurately project over a 2-year period. The multi-year projections can be very valuable over a long-range decision-making tool, but their accuracy lessens with each additional year. Finance already prepares the multi-year projections 3 times a year, and the LAO also prepares frequent multi-year projections. Increasing the frequency of projections prepared by Finance when there have been no updates to the underlying economic or expenditure forecast assumptions, we do not believe would be of any added value to the legislature. And then I have the same types of concerns with Fiscal and the timing issues, but we'll just stipulate that they were stated with Fiscal.
Understood. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the committee? Yeah. We have a motion by Senator Liu as amended. If you'd like to close.
Well, I have more confidence in the Department of Finance than they do, apparently. I think we can get this done. When Mr. Fuhr and I did those hearings that some of you were on, when we went around the state, when we listened to NCSL in other states, when we listened to reports from local government, including on the performance side, Sunnyvale had started this 20 years ago. There weren't the kind of costs. We're all aware that California is unique in terms of its size and its diversity, but given the experience of other organizations, I don't think the cost will be that significant to start it up. And as others have said, there'll be significant savings very quickly once we've done these 2 bills.
I know I've asked you to close, but Senator Wolk has a comment.
I just wanted to make a brief comment. I support the bill, of course, and I agree with your last statement, which also applies to mine. I did not have a close, so let me just, there are examples of counties, of cities, of states where this has been put into effect. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We know about cost. We've looked at them. We ought to follow those examples where this is extremely successful, better service, better results. And in many cases, savings as well. So this is an important thing to do. I support this bill.
Thank you, Senator Wilk. We will call the roll.
Do pass as amended to the floor. Leno.
Aye.
Huff. Aye. Alquist. Anderson. Aye. DeSaulnay.
Aye.
Emerson. Evans. Aye. Fuller. Hancock. LaMalfa. Aye. Liu. Aye. Lowenthal. Rubio. Aye. Semidian. Wolk. Aye. Wright.
Aye.
2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Bill passes.
We have 10
0.
votes. We will keep the roll open for this bill as well.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator. And our last bill today is SB 822 by Senator Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. This is a simple and common sense bill. Currently, the governor submits a 5-year infrastructure plan only to the legislature as required by law. This bill would amend that law and require him to submit it to the state treasurer's office as well. The state treasurer's office is the one that manages the sale of the voter-approved general obligation bonds and public lease revenue bonds to fund these infrastructure projects. So it only makes sense to require the report to be submitted to the treasurer so the treasurer would have the opportunity to comment. As I said, it's very simple. The treasurer supports the bill. It has no opposition that I know of, and I ask for an aye vote.
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
We do have a motion. Those who would like to speak in support of Senator Evans' SB 822. Anyone in opposition? Department of Finance?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Department of Finance is neutral on this measure, and the bill would have minor and absorbable costs.
Very good. Thank you. Would you like to close?
I ask for an aye vote.
All right. We'll call the roll.
Leno.
Aye.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to announce. Is it do pass as amended or straight?
It's do pass.
Do pass, sorry. Do pass to the floor. Leno.
Aye.
Huff. Alquist. Anderson.
Aye.
DeSaulnay. Aye. Emerson. Evans.
Aye.
Fuller. Hancock. LaMalfa. Liu. Lowenthal. Rubio. Semidion. Wolk. Wright. 6, 8, 9, 0. It's out.
Very good. We'll keep that roll open as well. Committee members, thank you for your time today. I will keep the roll open and stay here for a few more minutes just to determine whether other colleagues will be returning to cast votes or not, and then we'll close the roll in a few minutes. If we could lift the call, please, on all three bills, starting with Senator Wolk's SB 14. Lift the call, please.
And just call the absentees.
Absent members.
Hancock. SB 15. Alquist. Fuller. Hancock.
SB 15. Fuller, aye.
I'm sorry. Fuller, aye. Hancock. Lowenthal.
Aye.
Lowenthal, aye. Semidion.
Okay, we'll place that back on call, too.
He's not going to vote.
I know, but Lonnie, we're going to still wait for. And then SB 822, if you could call the absent members, please.
Huff. Alquist. Emerson. Fuller.
Aye.
Fuller, aye. Hancock. Hancock, aye. Sorry. Lowenthal.
Aye.
Lowenthal, aye.
How many votes on that? 12-0. We will close the roll on that. That bill is out. And we will return to SB 14 one last time. If you could call the absent members, please. 16-0. That bill is out. And one more time on SB 15, please call the absent members. 13-0, that bill is out. 14-0 on SB 15. That bill is out with no other business before the committee. We are adjourned.